Hello everybody, and welcome to the second day of the UFAW Online Animal Welfare Conference. I am Birte Nielsen, the Research Director of UFAW, and I'll be chairing this first session. Before we start, I will go through a little bit of practical information and repeat just a few slides of what Hugh presented to you yesterday, mainly because you may have forgotten, or you have only joined today. So welcome, first of all. This is a very broadly attended conference. We have 63 countries represented, and a wide variety of subjects and species have been covered yesterday and will be covered today. I will just very briefly tell you who we are at UFAW. We are the University's Federation for Animal Welfare. We are first and foremost a charity that is an international and scientific educational charity and membership organization. And our mission is to discover what matters to animals and to develop scientific solutions to animal welfare problems and to disseminate evidence-based animal welfare information, and this conference is part of that remit. We also publish the UFAW journal, Animal Welfare. This was founded in 1992, and it is actually the longest continuously published animal welfare journal. And we just recently, in January this year, went open access, gold open access, and we will encourage you all to go and have a look at the website for the journal. It's now published with Cambridge University Press, which is also a non-for-profit organization, just like UFAW, and it should be possible for anybody to publish with us. We offer extensive waivers for authors who cannot pay the production charges. We also publish a book series, and here are some of the books that we have and will be publishing. I will highlight in particular Wildlife Ethics, because one of the authors of that book, Jordan Hampton, will be our first speaker of today's session. So go and have a look at the books that UFAW offer. As an attendee of this conference, you get 20% off if you use the promo code VET20. But we will also heavily hint that if you are a member of UFAW, you actually get 35% off. So go and have a look at that as well. We are funded solely by donations and legacies, and we are supported by members and donors. So if you want to support us and the science and the service of animal welfare, you can do so by either donating to support our work or becoming a member of UFAW. So go and have a look at our website and see what's possible. We are already planning next year's conference. As you may remember, last year we were live in Edinburgh having a conference that was both online and in person. This year we are going online only to try and reduce our carbon footprint. But it is important to meet up every now and again. So next year we will aim for having in-person conference that also can be joined online, and it will be somewhere in Europe, let's say. It is very difficult with us being in a country outside of the EU to try and organize stuff in Europe at the moment, but we are trying hard. Some practicalities. Given that you're here, you have used the link, so you know how to get here, but it's the same link. The hashtag is UFAW 2023 if you would like to tweet from the conference. The sessions are being recorded and they'll be available to view on our YouTube channel. And I can say that the sessions from yesterday are already up there to be viewed only by people who have registered for the conference, but nevertheless, you can see them all there. You will find the link in the chat function of the GoToWebinar on your screen. And the program is also available there. The link is also in the chat and is on the screen here, or can be found using the QR code currently shown. some of you may see this if you're using a browser, is what you see, the slides and the questions. But most of you may have logged in like this, where you see these different options. The handouts are in the bar called, or the line called handout, where you can click to view the program. And the audio you can change by clicking on the audio link. For questions, if you are in the if you're a presenter, you'll have to put your questions into the chat, but everybody else, all attendees should put their questions into the questions box. You can make it come out separately if you want, to make it easier to put questions in. Most of you were here yesterday, so it should go smooth. For the posters, and we are trying something a bit new this year, and it took a while to get going, but I think it really took off yesterday. In the program, you can find the abstract of each poster. You go down and click on Go to Poster at the bottom of the abstract, and that will take you to the Dropbox where all the posters are, and you can then post in the Slack channel that you have also logged onto via, it's all in the emails that Steve have been sending you. You can put your questions in for each of the posters and for the talks as well, if you want, if some of the questions that were raised were not being answered. So please have a look at the Slack channel, have a look at the posters, and be as active as you can. That will be kept open for a while afterwards as well, so don't be hesitant to check in afterwards. And we have an exciting program in front of us. Just to advertise that at 10 o'clock, well, British summertime anyway, we will have Lars Chitka talk to us about bee sentience. And we also have the 2 early career researchers of the year. That award was announced or given out yesterday, but they will both be speaking today. Sarah Hintze at 2:20 today, and Jordan Hampton will open this morning. As soon as I stop ranting on here, Jordan Hampton will talk to us at 8:10. And finally, if you have any comments or questions, please send an email to events@ufaw.org.uk. And we would also really much like you to fill in the post-conference survey. I put up the link here. It may be in one of the emails you have received, and this is the QR code also. There are only 8 questions. It's fairly easy to fill in, both on your phone or on the computer. Please wait until the conference has completely finished, but some of you may not be sticking on all the way to the end. And one of the reasons for that is, as you know, this is starting, well, early for the Brits anyway, but still late for the people in Australasia. And this is an attempt from us to try and accommodate the different time zones. So this morning will be heavily populated by people from the Southern Hemisphere. Welcome to you all. It's a bit later where you are. And with that, I think we are more or less ready to go. We start with Jordan Hampton, and please, Steve, if you will take over and launch that. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Jordan Hampton from the University of Melbourne in Australia, and this is a pretty ambitious conceptual presentation arguing for a new or a refined approach to how we think about wild animal welfare in the Anthropocene. And the gist of the talk I'm presenting today is that I think we need more focus on the indirect and unintentional impacts that humans are having on wild animals. I think the ubiquity of anthropogenic changes happening across the planet have been well recognised in other fields of scientific inquiry, but less so in animal welfare. And I'm going to use a case study talking about the heavy metal lead and wildlife scavengers to try and illustrate what I think are some of the challenges we're facing in the modern day when we're thinking about the welfare of free-ranging animals. I don't think anyone needs an introduction to the idea of the Anthropocene or needs a reminder of the profound effects that humans are having on our planet, from our climate to our ecosystems and everything in between, which is only intensifying as years and decades go by. While this change has been recognised pretty well by fields like ecology and even human medicine increasingly, animal welfare has had a historical focus on domestic animals and very controlled settings like laboratories or intensive agriculture. And I think it's been quite slow for animal welfare science to start appreciating some of the new challenges that are being posed by this intense period of the Anthropocene and what that means for how we conceive of and measure wild animal welfare. Ecosystems are very complex, obviously much more so than domestic animal settings. And while a lot of that complexity is recognised in studies of ecosystems and population dynamics, animal welfare studies have tended to really just focus on ways in which humans intentionally harm wild animals. There have been some paradigms that have challenged this, such as the harms model proposed by David Fraser and colleagues that have suggested 4 different ways in which humans harm wild animals, including those processes that are neither intentional nor direct. So here we can think about pollution, climate change, introduced species, etc. And pollution, or at least one type, chemical pollution, is what I'm going to focus on. When we think about poisons, most animal welfare discussions of poisons have really been restricted just to those poisons that are intentionally used to kill wild animals, whether they are rodenticides used to kill mice and rats in our homes, or poisons such as 1080 applied to wide-ranging species such as brush-tailed possums in New Zealand. But there hasn't been much thought about chemicals that harm wild animals but have been released into the environment unintentionally. And there's a huge range of these, from chemicals we use for euthanizing animals in vet clinics to plastics, many of the persistent organic pollutants or POPs. But the one toxicant I'm going to focus on today is lead, the well-known heavy metal. Lead is a really nasty chemical in the environment. It has really strong neurotoxic effects, but beyond dramatic fatal cases of toxication, it also has some subtle and long-term non-lethal impacts. These have been observed in humans, domestic animals, and also wildlife. For these reasons, lead's been banned from many products in our societies, thinking of fuel, paint, but not ammunition. It continues to be used a lot to make bullets for rifles and shot for shotguns. Wildlife shooting globally is a really widespread activity. I've done a lot of work on wildlife shooting in Australia, and that applies to the control of hyperabundant native species like kangaroos in Australia, culling for introduced species like feral horses, feral camels and deer, and also recreational hunting. A lot of animal welfare scrutiny has been applied to shooting, but traditionally it's only focused on those animals being shot. And a lot of studies have thought about this in terms of the duration of suffering for those animals, the frequency of adverse events like non-fatal wounding, but there hasn't been much thought for indirect impacts of shooting activities. And this is a shame, because one thing that happens when lead is used in ammunition is that carcasses of shot animals end up being absolutely riddled with toxic and tiny lead fragments. And you can see from the X-ray in this slide that traditional carcass shot with a lead bullet can be absolutely filled with these fragments that are invisible for humans that are eating the meat, and also from wildlife that are scavenging on these carcasses. And we've got quite a few protocols that have been applied to professional shooting methods designed to make sure that animals die quickly when they're shot and that the risk of them being non-fatally wounded is minimised. And one of those has been repeat shooting. So instead of shooting animals once, shooting them 3, 4, 5 times. And this makes good sense for trying to improve animal welfare outcomes for the animal shot, but unfortunately it increases the degree of lead contamination in these carcasses, and that has implications. The main implication is that it increases the quantity of toxic material that can be scavenged by wildlife. And for a lot of shooting methods, carcasses are left in the landscape. These are non-consumptive shooting methods. And for scavenging birds, scavenging mammals, or even reptiles, it's quite easy for them to ingest a toxic or at least a harmful dose of lead in this way. And this has been a really important process for wildlife conservation, and it's almost led to the extinction of some species, such as the California condor. And a recent study from North America suggested that the numerical scale of this process is huge, maybe impacting up to 150,000 bald eagles in the USA currently. And this isn't just restricted to wild birds. The same process, ingestion of toxic lead fragments from meat, can apply to not only other wildlife species, but also domestic animals. Thinking of dogs that are fed meat from wildlife, captive animals in zoos, and also people. So humans that eat game meat regularly have also been shown to be affected by neurotoxic impacts from lead. So there are many welfare impacts arising from wildlife shooting, not restricted to those animals that are shot or their conspecifics. And numerically, the most important animal welfare impact from wildlife shooting might actually be the impacts of lead on scavengers. So how can we not account for these animals and these impacts when we're asked to perform animal welfare assessments? One of the obvious reasons is that these aren't intentional and not obvious impacts. And another obvious reason is that often the species being shot, let's say feral horses here, are considered to be quite charismatic, whereas sometimes the scavenging species, if we think of ravens or crows and corvids, certainly tend to elicit less sympathy from many sectors of society. So we have a trade-off here when it comes to wildlife shooting and animal welfare. We have, on one hand, the animal being shot, shown here by a deer, but then on the other side of the scales, we have eagles and corvids, we have Tasmanian devils or bears, and we also have domestic animals like dogs that we feed this game meat to. This situation is certainly not unique to lead and shooting. I've only chosen it because I feel like it hasn't received a lot of attention until now, but I think this situation is best exemplified by anticoagulant rodenticides. And I think in recent years, there's been a lot more awareness of the animal welfare and conservation impacts of using these baits in our homes and the unintended consequences that might have for species like owls that eat the rodents and often live around our dwellings. So I'm arguing I think we need a shift in focus when we think about wildlife welfare, moving away from solely intentional impacts to encompassing all the anthropogenic harms that we have on animals. And I think this will involve taking our blinders off, if we use a horse analogy, and not just looking straight ahead at the animals we're intentionally impacting, but thinking more holistically about all the animals, wild or otherwise, that might be harmed by these activities. And I think in this context, most of our investigations of wildlife welfare to date have really been the tip of the iceberg. They've been restricted to some of the research and management activities that we intentionally apply. But as the Anthropocene intensifies, I think we're realising that through chemicals, introduced species, infectious diseases and climate change, we're really having a very broad impact on many wildlife species and unintentionally. And this is a shameless plug for a textbook I've worked on with several colleagues that UFAW will be releasing this year. It's on wildlife ethics, and it really gets to the core of these questions. And in other contexts like wind farms, how we balance up welfare impacts that might be direct, say from wind turbines hitting flying wildlife, versus those long-term indirect impacts that might arise from processes like climate change. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm really just building on past ideas here. There's nothing particularly novel about this, but we just don't tend to talk about animal welfare when we discuss these pollution or contamination issues. And I think it's important to note this builds on an idea termed animal welfare accountancy that was proposed by Penny Fisher, and also relates to animal ethics challenges set by David Fraser when he's argued that we really do need a new ethic for animals in the modern age. And final thoughts here. I don't think it's complete now in the Anthropocene to talk about wild animal welfare unless we explicitly account for these indirect and unintentional processes. And I think on a positive note, if we start to expand our animal welfare conceptions of what impacts wild animals, we're probably going to bridge the gap between traditional approaches to animal advocacy focused on rights towards having a better alignment with an environmental ethics that really considers all animals and all species in an ecosystem. And my thank you notes here go to the University of Melbourne and the Murdoch University, my two institutions, and also to WIRES from New South Wales in Australia, who funded a lot of my research into lead exposure in Australian animals. My contact details are at the bottom of the slide here. Please get in touch if you'd like to discuss any of the ideas that I've covered today. Thank you.
Muted, Beata.
Double clicking, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Jordan, and congratulations again for the receiving the Early Career Researcher Award for UFAW. It is well deserved. We have a number of questions. The first one is, do you think wildlife welfare needs to be recognized by governments and that more needs to be done through legislation to manage practices? Like, should there be something like a wild animal duty of care like there is for domestic animals? We can't hear you, Jordan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, can.
Great. Yeah, I absolutely think there's more and more interest in seeing that extra attention being devoted to wildlife. I think we have the added difficulty that I didn't touch on in this presentation about all the non-anthropogenic impacts that also harm wild animals that make things a bit more complicated than when we think about domestic animals where we have a clear duty of care. Another thing I could talk about all day is the growing difficulty in trying to distinguish between these clearly anthropogenic processes and those that might be natural or might now be becoming blurred. But there's a lot of challenges there to face, and I think things are moving so rapidly as the environment's changing for so many animals that it's quite hard to keep pace with not only the science, but what our ethical responsibilities might be.
Yeah, good point. More questions coming in. Do you think that using the increasing interest in environmental issues provides the discourse or the mechanism to take the blinkers off for the broader community? Can we link the fact that we can have environmental issues in that might also be solved in one fell swoop?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the obvious linkage there is that all of these processes that impact animals at a population level also impact them at an individual animal level. That hasn't historically been the focus because a lot of concern has been about biodiversity or ecosystem services. But now that we have more and more people concerned about the lives of individual animals, it makes sense to expand these concerns away from the population and right down to the level of individuals. And that's the argument I'm making with lead. If you see an individual animal affected, you can see that there's a clear degree of suffering that's often over a long duration beyond any concern we might have for the preservation of a species.
Sort of a local question, what species in Australia do you think are most at risk to the threats that you have outlined?
We're relatively lucky in Australia in that we don't have any obligate terrestrial scavengers. So these are animals that derive all of their nutrients from scavenging on dead material. We have what are called facultative scavengers like wedge-tailed eagles. We have quite a few corvids. We have Tasmanian devils in the mammal category that get most of their nutrients from scavenging, and they're all certainly susceptible. We've only really started doing research in this field in the last few years, and everywhere we've looked predictably we've found lead exposure. So we might not have the degree of human landscape use that some more densely populated countries do, but nonetheless the process seems to be ubiquitous wherever you look in the world.
On a more international level, lead in ammunition do you have an idea of how widely spread this problem is? Is it everywhere? Is it, do all countries have lead in ammunition?
No, some more progressive countries and states of countries have moved towards banning lead at a legislative level. In other places, there's been voluntary moves towards using lead-free products by people that are concerned about their own health, those of their children, if they're feeding game meat to their family, and also for concern for threatened wildlife species such as the California condor, the golden eagle or bald eagle. In our particular neck of the woods, there's not particularly widespread awareness at the moment, but we're working on it.
Okay. I'm just seeing if there are more questions. So Indigenous people often argue that they should be, sorry, I just lost it here, that they should be allowed to keep practices that, if done by other non-Indigenous people, might get dismissed as inhumane. For instance, the dolphin slaughtering in the Faroe Islands. Can you comment?
I think it's a very interesting question. It's probably a bit outside what I've focused on in this talk, but coincidentally, we have included a chapter addressing that particular issue in the upcoming book that I've written with colleagues on wildlife ethics, looking at some marine mammal harvesting practices or whaling, and some of the different expectations for animal welfare outcomes or use of technology when we go between commercial industries and traditional practices that are associated with maintaining cultures.
Another question, perhaps a little bit out with what you talked about just now, but should we include impacts of the climate crisis in the way that we think about welfare impacts? We're back to the environmental pollution and animal welfare. Should climate impact, can we put it in as well?
Yeah, I think it's part of the same picture, and probably nothing's more widespread in the modern day than images of starving polar bears that are associated with retreating Arctic summer ice, and that's probably a great picture for what might be described as an animal welfare impact of climate change. So we're going to see more and more of these impacts where infectious diseases change their distribution and their prevalence. We have species expanding into new areas and all kinds of challenges associated with droughts, bushfires, and extreme weather events. And if we do accept that all of these changes to our weather are anthropogenic, I think we're going to have more and more discussions about our duty to intervene and try and assist animals or prevent suffering when these kind of emergency events occur.
Well, thank you very much, Jordan. It has been a delight to hear you talk. I was going to say I look forward to reading your book, but I have already done so because we are part of the UFAW crew, so I can recommend it. Thank you very much. And I think we will go on to our next speaker. So our next speaker of today is Mia Cobb, and she will be talking about animal welfare assurance in the 21st century, navigating the landscape of welfare washing, regulatory capture, and social license to operate. Thank you very much, Jordan.
Thanks to UFAW for holding this event and to everyone tuning in around the world. Today's presentation will explore the tangled space we find ourselves in here, nearly a quarter of the way through the 21st century, a time when animal welfare is recognised as a community concern in many countries. We're going to look at the animal welfare assurance of industries and operators reliant upon animals and how to identify real progress to advance animal welfare from deception. There's a lot to cover in a short time, so some areas will be necessarily brief.
My name is Mia Cobb, and I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I work and live, and recognise that the Indigenous Australian people are our country's first scientists, with deep and enduring knowledge of the lands, skies and waters and animals. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands from which you are joining this conference. I also want to recognise the wonderful thinking of Dr. Sam Gaines of RSPCA England and Wales that is reflected in this presentation. We welcome your feedback on today's overview as we are preparing a manuscript for publication that will provide more detail on the concepts I'll describe today. Let's get started.
Thankfully, I'm back inside now, so I won't need to bellow at you over the sounds of the wind and traffic. So how do we get here? Why do we even need animal welfare assurance in 2023? Well, advances in animal welfare science have highlighted animal sentience, and with that has come a moral obligation for people responsible for animals and their care to ensure positive welfare experiences, not just minimisation of harm and suffering. In response, community attitudes towards animal welfare are changing, and this is putting pressure on industries and operators dependent on animals to assure their welfare as a priority for sustainable operations. This presentation is going to examine the key concepts such as social licence to operate, welfare washing, regulatory capture, and the role of science in understanding animal welfare in operations dependent on animals. We don't have to look far to understand the impact when community expectations and evidence of practices relating to the human management of animals are not in alignment. Some recent examples that I've found here reflect the changing attitudes of our communities. These include things like live export of sheep overseas from Australia and New Zealand, the testing of cosmetic products on animals in Canada, exotic animals performing in circuses, and racing animals for the purpose of gambling. We see public protests and industry disruption, often media exposés play a role in this. And this community acceptance and its ability to impact operations reliant on animals is what we know as social licence to operate. Social licence to operate is a term that originated in the extractive industries like mining and forestry, where they found they must balance economic interests with public concerns for the environment. This was integral to maintaining their social licence to operate and sustainable operations. The same has been shown to be true for operations reliant upon animals, balancing the public concern for animal welfare. A social licence is in some respects intangible. It's not a physical licence. It can't be granted legally or politically. We define social licence to operate as a trust and acceptance of society that an industry or operator is acting ethically and responsibly. The foundations of social licence to operate are legitimacy, where both the actor and the action need to be legitimate, trust, which is a two-directional relationship between the operator and its stakeholders, and consent, which is dependent only upon the opinion of the rights holders for those impacted directly by the activity, which in relation to operations depending on animals is often those representing or advocating for animal well-being. This can be organisations, individuals, or the community at large. The control that community demands and expectations can exert over the practices of operators that use resources with perceived public value is referred to as social licence pressure. It really importantly highlights the need to align practices with transparent evidence, public values, and animal welfare expectations to reduce social licence pressure and maintain social licence to operate. We can look to zoos as a case study for maintaining social licence. This is an area where changing public values and expectations have meant significant changes. Zoos have had to adapt to maintain their social licence and address concerns regarding animal welfare in things like habitats that have off-display areas that the animals can go to if they don't want to be in the public view, more significant enrichment programs, moving animals to appropriate free-range properties. For example, the elephants at Melbourne Zoo are being relocated next year to an open-range zoo with much more space available for them, and even phasing out some species that are no longer deemed suitable. There's also a role of accreditation by external association that seeks more than just the minimum standards of care. These have been shown to provide zoo visitors with a level of assurance of the welfare of the animals they see while visiting an accredited zoo, although many people aren't actually aware of such accreditation programs. And there are some skeptics that think that accreditation by some bodies is just a box-ticking exercise. So let's look at one that's very transparent and clear so that we can see what a valuable accreditation program looks like. I'd like to thank the Zoo and Aquarium Association of Australasia for letting me share this content from their website in this talk. To overcome scepticism, accreditation programs must be current and evidence-based. They need to be independently conducted and ongoing, which means not just repeated over time, but constantly reviewed and assessed on their own effectiveness, as well as having or requiring repeated visits for ongoing accreditation of a facility. Poor accreditation can potentially depress animal welfare assurance by focusing on producing minimum standards or existing only to support achievable standards, rather than developing high standards that complement current thinking in animal welfare science. This can require substantial shifts in how animal welfare is perceived and managed. A valuable accreditation process should represent good practice and high standards, where government legislation may only require minimum standards. So the Zoo and Aquarium Association of Australasia models its animal welfare assessment and accreditation on the 5 domains as our leading science-based structure for assessing animal welfare. This includes looking at the 4 physical and functional domains, being the nutrition, physical environment, health and behavioural interaction domains, and understanding how they all impact the 5th mental domain, reflecting animal welfare. In some cases, accreditation isn't assessing what it might appear to at face value. For example, there may be accreditation of the paper trail keeping process that gets audited, rather than whether that paperwork accurately reflects what happens to animals. Transparency is integral to public trust. We know this from social psychology. And here we can see on the website of the Zoo and Aquarium Association of Australasia, they're very transparent about what is required to be accredited. There's a 5-step process that involves different levels of assessment and meeting criteria and review before a zoo will be accredited by their association. There are real challenges to distinguishing genuine claims of progressing animal well-being from welfare washing practices. Akin to greenwashing in the extractive environmental sector, we define humane washing or welfare washing as the presentation of inaccurate, false or misleading information about animal welfare practices to improve public reputation by appearing to take responsibility for animal well-being. When deceptive, welfare washing can be used to create an illusion of ethical practices without substantial improvements in animal care. This tweet's an example that I've taken from Twitter. It says, in case your Danish isn't up to scratch, "In a country where very close of 0% of pigs see the sky in their short lives, the Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Fisheries choose to illustrate their new export action plan with this image. Animal welfare is mentioned 0 times in the plan. Is welfare washing a national state-supported strategy?" So this is an example where using this image for an industry strategy plan has been perceived as being used deliberately misleading. However, one point that we want to highlight in this talk is that we don't believe all welfare washing is produced with malicious intent. Having looked over many examples from racing, working and companion animal sectors, we have developed this early conceptual model about the types of welfare washing we have seen. This uses an axis to map the intention behind the apparent welfare washing, along with the knowledge of the individual or group producing it. We have identified 3 types of welfare washing in the context of industries relying upon animals, and note that they can overlap when mapped this way. The first is deliberate welfare washing. This involves the intentional spread of false or misleading information about animal welfare practices. It's driven by a malicious intent to deceive or manipulate others for the benefit of the industry or specific stakeholders. Those engaged in deliberate welfare washing may possess a high or low level of knowledge about accurate information, but choose to engage in deceptive practices to promote their interests, reputation, or economic gain. An example would be a marketing campaign that deliberately shows misleading imagery not indicative of actual practices aiming to improve brand reputation and sales. Next, we've identified disinformed welfare washing. This refers to the dissemination of false or misleading information about animal welfare practices, where those responsible may themselves be misinformed or lacking accurate knowledge. It can occur both unintentionally, driven by a lack of awareness or outdated understanding, or intentionally, when false information is spread to mitigate concerns or improve the industry's public image. Disinformed welfare washing involves varying degrees of knowledge and may include elements of misinformation, lack of awareness, or selective presentation of information. For an example, an egg producer might claim, either deliberately or naively, that their chickens are raised in spacious environments, even if those conditions don't align with current scientific evidence of what is good practice to optimise the welfare of hens. However, the individuals disseminating this information genuinely believe it to be true, as they might rely on outdated or inaccurate knowledge about animal welfare standards. They may not intentionally seek to mislead, but are uninformed about modern welfare practices. And finally, we have misinformed welfare washing. This describes the unintentional spread of false or misleading information about animal welfare practices due to a lack of accurate knowledge or awareness. The individuals or organisations engaged in misinformed welfare washing genuinely believe that their claims align with high welfare standards, but are unaware of the accurate information or have misconceptions about animal welfare practices. Misinformed welfare washing is driven by a lack of knowledge or access to reliable information rather than an intentional desire to deceive, although it may still have unintended negative effects on animal welfare. For example, in the context of racing animals, operators may claim that their animals are provided with high levels of welfare because they are given secure housing, the opportunity to exercise, and veterinary attention when required. Misinformed welfare washing occurs because the racing participants genuinely believe that they are providing adequate welfare standards for the animals based on their understanding of what animals require. They might be unaware of the specific welfare issues prevalent in racing, such as confinement, overbreeding, aversive training methods, injuries, and improper retirement plans for animals. Their dissemination of false information about the adequacy of welfare practices is not driven by a deliberate deception, but rather a lack of awareness or accurate knowledge about the evidence which underpins the industry's welfare challenges, contributing to the erosion of social licence to operate. This brings us to regulatory capture. In the context of animal welfare assurance and safeguarding, this refers to the situation where industries or interest groups exert undue influence over regulatory agencies or policymakers responsible for establishing and enforcing animal welfare regulations. It has been likened to putting the fox in charge of the hen house, or as here in this article discussing regulatory capture in the banking sector when watchdogs become pets. This influence can lead to the formulation of regulations that prioritise economic interests or industry preferences over the evidence base and well-being of animals, potentially compromising the effectiveness of regulatory measures and impeding genuine advancements in providing optimal animal welfare. This situation highlights the need for separation of competing responsibilities and the need for independent animal welfare authorities within industries and government. Jed Goodfellow has done an in-depth exploration of this relating to agriculture in Australia, and I'll just reference this diagram briefly in the interest of time. But basically it shows that the Department of Agriculture in Australia can be said to possess competing responsibilities in terms of promoting productive and profitable primary industries, while at the same time being responsible for protecting and promoting farm animal welfare. The difficulty lies in the respective priority placed on each responsibility, with the department's overriding mission and very reason for existence dictating against any possibility of a balanced approach. This leads to the department's interests aligning with the regulated parties, where they have adopted the same instrumental approach to animal welfare as that advanced by the livestock industries themselves. Consequently, the department deviates from serving the public interest in farm animal welfare assurance, and this is then demonstrated by various regulatory failures and process deficiencies. These features bear all the hallmarks of a framework suffering from regulatory capture. Where this occurs, reforms are required to correct these imbalances, to restore legitimacy, and to institutionalise the growing public interest in animal welfare within our systems of government. There is a crucial role for the interdisciplinary animal welfare science to help in understanding and improving animal welfare. We need not just scientific research to provide the evidence-based knowledge of animal well-being and how we can care for animals in ways that provide them with a good life. We also need to understand the impact of different environments and management practices, but equally important is understanding community values, people's attitudes, and critical human behaviour change strategies. It's not just enough to know what animals need to lead a good life. We need to know how to get people to provide that. In considering how to engage public trust, there's a clear need for transparent frameworks for animal welfare assurance, and these are some of the elements we believe are key. We're going to need to implement third-party audits with clear standards and regular reportings as guidelines. There's a potential role for emerging technologies in safeguarding animal welfare and providing publicly available evidence to assure communities that animal welfare is taken seriously, and to disprove claims of welfare washing, regulatory capture, or other types of virtue signalling. Like occupational health and safety initiatives for people, a framework for animal welfare will keep individuals and businesses and industries accountable and encourage proactive rather than reactive ethos of continuous improvement. New frameworks will come with their own inherent benefits and challenges. Obviously, advantages are things like enhanced credibility for organisations that undertake or commit to these frameworks, improved accountability, which will rebuild public trust and underpin sustainable interactions with animals. Whereas challenges are things like overcoming resistance to change, keeping organisations or people accountable, particularly if they're making claims, making sure sufficient resources are provided to fulfil strategies and promises, making sure there are meaningful collaborations, and this is going to call for industries to reach out to perhaps animal advocacy groups in a really meaningful way to hear their concerns and legitimately try to address them. And we need to be aware that there are some operators reliant upon animals that currently practice completely out of sight or are escaping regulation. So in conclusion, we have looked at these topics of social licence to operate, welfare washing and regulatory capture, and they're all important to understand. There's a very important role for interdisciplinary animal welfare science in safeguarding and assuring animal welfare as we move forward in the 21st century. It's very important to distinguish genuine animal welfare advances from misleading claims, and to do that we're going to need transparency across whole of life, independent assessments and evidence-based practices. I think it's really important for us as animal welfare scientists and stakeholders to foster meaningful collaborations with industries, as researchers and with regulatory bodies to keep pushing for change that will uphold public trust and, most importantly, ensure the well-being of animals in our care. Thanks for your attention. Here are some of the references that we used today. And we welcome your questions and discussion on these topics now or by follow-up email later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mia. And there you are, live. Thank you for your talk. Lots of questions coming in. Nice to see bits of a slide in Danish. Thank you for that. A very sort of practical question, I suppose. As a question from Paul Rose. It's about your zoo case accreditation. So has the the Zoological Zoo and Aquarium Association been able to define and provide measurable and repeatable methods of assessment of the fifth domain for all species in the zoo living collection, including species that we may still struggle to provide accurate resource-based approaches for, such as amphibians, invertebrates, and fish?
Look, I know that they're always actively reviewing and updating not just, I guess, their outlines for good practice, but also the way in which they assess it. A lot of their work is done in conjunction with research institutes in terms of validating their own processes, and there are publications that are out. I'm happy to find those and I can email them to you, Paul, to show you, I guess, the things that are out and have been published so far. Specifically regarding amphibians, I'd have to go back and check, which I'm happy to do. I haven't got that information to hand.
Sort of more generally, do you think that the misinformed and disinformed groups would be receptive to changing their behavior? Like, are there any groups that you have attempted to engage with about perceived welfare washing?
Really good question. I don't know that I've got to the point of reaching out and saying to someone, I think you're welfare washing. But I also feel like it's on the brink of happening at a community level, and it won't be long until we're hearing that term used a lot more in the way that we hear greenwashing, eco-washing kind of bandied about. So I don't think it needs to come from me. Certainly in terms of engaging with industries that can be challenging to be interested in animal welfare, I have, and this is a topic that came up after Beth's talk yesterday. One of the things that I found is generally, or often, there are some sectors that just won't be motivated to change for the sake of improving the animal experience, and we might need to find other arguments that are still true that will leverage that kind of change we want to see, but perhaps from different directions. So it might be using an economic argument. It might be talking about staff satisfaction and reducing turnover. It might be about efficiency of a program, or getting better performance or outcomes or products. So there are other ways, I guess, we can couch the argument, because generally when animals live a better life, there are other benefits that come from that.
And on that, we will have to finish. For those of you who haven't had your questions answered, you can post them on the Slack channel, and hopefully Mia will answer them. Maybe not tonight for you, maybe tomorrow, but it will be there. So thank you very much, Mia.
Evenings, young. Thank you.
Our next talker is Eileen Thumpkin, who will be talking about coming home, staying home, adoption and return of dogs from RSPCA Queensland's shelters.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today about research around the journey of dogs who are at high risk of return in RSPCA Queensland shelters. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which I talk with you today and pay my respects to elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the collective input of Drs. Patterson, Morton and Professor Picana in this research journey. Why investigate? Each year, millions of dogs enter shelters worldwide for care and for rehoming. And not all dogs are successful in their first adoption, their second or even their third. Unsuccessful adoptions extend the time that these dogs may spend in shelter and certainly can have a negative impact on the dogs and the people who care for them. It can also put a strain on the resources of the organisation. Although dog intake numbers for RSPCA shelters across Australia have been declining, there is concern that the profile of the dogs being surrendered is also changing, with many of these dogs being perhaps more challenging to care for, as well as more challenging to rehome. The aim of our research is to improve the overall outcomes of adoption dogs or dogs in adoption. To do this, we wanted to gain up-to-date knowledge about the dogs in our care and their adoption needs, and to provide shelters with information about these dogs and how to better promote and match them with their potential adopters. Also, hopefully, we could identify ways that we might be able to improve our adoption processes and more effectively target interventions and support once the dog leaves the shelter. So, which dogs did we discover were at a higher risk of post-adoption return? A 2-year retrospective study using survival analysis investigated readmission data for dogs adopted from RSPCA Queensland shelters between January 2019 and December 2020. We were interested in trying to identify if there were risk factors associated with readmission for our study population, and if there were any significant temporal patterns. Did it occur at any particular times, which may have been more critical? Who was at greatest risk? Well, we did discover significant differences were identified between the factors of size, age, colour, breed, and time in foster before adoption. For example, small toy cross dogs, aged 2 to 3 months, who had been in foster care before adoption, were at a much lower risk of return. In contrast, brindle, giant breed cross dogs, aged 6 to 12 months, who had not been in foster care before adoption, were much more likely to be returned after adoption. Time in foster, it was found, before adoption, appeared to reduce the risk of return and may in fact be a protective factor supporting successful transition to a new home. And our research found that it didn't matter what the amount of time spent in foster, even the smallest amount of time did have a positive impact. In addition, we also identified that the behaviour support provided for the dogs appeared to be working to also improve their outcomes. And how risky was adoption for these dogs? 865 of the dogs of the 6,000 plus adoptions were returned within the study period. The majority were returned by their owners, with a small percentage coming in as strays. Just under 64% came back within that 14-day period, and we found that of those that came back in that period, 119 came back within a 24-hour period. This certainly raised questions about what happened in these cases. As you can see from the graph, on day 14 there is a spike in the graph, and you can see that the approximately 2/3 of the dogs returned in the first 2-week period before the returns stabilised at around day 22. The overall return rate for this period of our study was just under 15%. We did contribute perhaps that spike at day 14 to the refund policy of RSPCA Queensland, whereby the costs of adoption are refunded to the adopter if the dog returns within that 2-week period. However, several research papers, Diesel et al., Gunter et al. And Carter, reported similar patterns for a higher return rate post-adoption in that 2-week period. So what did the study suggest? Well, the study suggested that perhaps we can invest more time in increasing the capability and capacity of our foster carers, of differentiating those foster carers and targeting particular dogs with particular needs. We did look at or consider foster to adoption. That may well be that they are adopted from foster and do not come back into the shelter, which is also something that's certainly been widely investigated around and across a number of shelters. The other thing was to target promotional programs and support for people who may want to adopt an older dog or a larger dog and just need that additional support or pre-adoption counselling before that happens. The other thing that RSPCA Queensland has been doing fairly recently is investing in outreach programs. And these programs go into the community. They may provide basic vet care, health checkups, provide worming vaccination, and also food to dog owners in the attempt to keep the dog in the home and prevent a surrender or a readmission. And the response from the community, people who attend, and also the local councils in these areas has been very positive to date. However, one thing that we thought would be another avenue to explore was to investigate what happens once the dog walks out the door, gets into the car, and then gets out of that car at its new home. One way of doing this and getting a more qualitative insight of getting somewhere into the home is to do interviews. Study 2 is based around phone interviews with adopters of dogs with the higher risk dogs, those with a hazard ratio of 1.5 or greater. We're targeting 2 subgroups in that, dogs that were adopted and returned, as well as those dogs that were adopted and not returned. Up to date, I've undertaken 31 interviews, and I will be using Leximancer to do a qualitative thematic analysis of that text. Leximancer is different than a number of other text analysis programs. What it does is does not start with pre-coding. You can load massive amounts of data, and it will generate concepts and then themes that it identifies within those transcripts. And then it's up to the researcher to do the analysis of these themes. And this is a very early dump from 2/3 of the data to date. And as you can see, those bubbles, where the larger the bubble and warmer the size of the bubble, the more significant is that theme. However, the names on the themes may well not be the same conceptual understanding that we have in the way that that text is used by this population in their transcripts. And that's why you then need to go behind those themes and investigate and read the information that's been used to make those associations and relationships. So, for example, life. If I go behind the word life and have a look at some of the transcripts, people are talking about giving the dog a good life. They're talking about the dog's role in their life. They're talking about keeping the dog for its life. And they're talking about their lifestyle. Listening to adopter stories and qualitative interviews provide you with a unique opportunity to get a richer understanding of what the dynamic is between the dog, the adopter, and the family or the environment in which they are living once the dog leaves the shelter. And I've just got a couple of small extracts to give a little bit of an illustration of how open and honest people were in their reflections on their experiences. I did ask all the interviewers about their decisions, what made them decide to get a dog, why they chose that dog, what happened in the first couple of days when they took the dog home, or the first couple of weeks, what did they do to help the dog settle in, for them to get to build a relationship. And finally, I asked them for their reflections on the process of adoption, as well as what advice they might give to the shelter or to other people who were thinking of adopting a dog. The first extract is from Jimmy, that's Jimmy, and Jimmy was adopted. The owner, or the adopter, had not had a dog for 40 years. He was in his early 60s. He had a cat problem. He was taking a cage back to RSPCA, just made the decision on the spot that he would adopt a dog, saw Jimmy, adopted him because he liked the look of him and because the response he got from Jimmy when he went to Jimmy's cage. He was quite honest in his comments to me about what it was like when he first took the dog home. He said, as you can see, that he had completely unrealistic expectations, that it was really a bit rough for them till he came to his senses, and he said the experience has taught him a lot about patience and learned that he needed to learn about caring for a large dog, that he investigated dog psychology because he didn't understand why the dog was doing certain things. And he also commented that it was actually a two-way street. It was a relationship building exercise. And luckily for Jimmy, he's still there, and they have a great time together, despite the fact that Jimmy is still recovering from surgery for his cruciate ligament tear. The second dog is Shay. Shay's a large, fearful dog that was put into foster when the shelters were cleared in the COVID lockdown. And Shay was taken by the two people who were volunteers at RSPCA, knew Shay, and decided that their son could do his bit. He and his partner could look after Shay while the shelters were in lockdown. Long story short, they'd not had a dog. They were a little overawed by the fact that Shay was such a large dog. However, the young man thought, okay, great, I'm a surfer, live near the beach, I'll be able to take the dog running down the beach, they'll be able to go swimming, to learn that she actually was water phobic and very fearful of novel environments. And he explained the process that he and his partner went through to work with Shay and come to know her, get her to trust them, to get her to feel safe, and to understand what her limits were and to work with them and not try and force or teach her to be happy in the water. And when it came time for Shay to go back, these two people decided, no, we're going to keep Shay. However, she will paddle in the water, but she's never going to be a swimmer. The third story is Cowboy, and Cowboy is a dog who was adopted 4 times, returned 3. The first sentence relates to the first person who adopted Cowboy and the expectation they had and the realisation they had on the way home in the car that this dog was out of their league. They had gone with the blueprint of having had miniature schnauzers, but chose Shay off the website, liked the look of her, liked the profile, thought they could do a good thing and give a rescue dog a home, but certainly realised very quickly that they did not have the lifestyle or the capability or capacity to care for a large dog. I could allay that person who relayed this story to me feeling very bad that she had put Cowboy through a bad experience and it would have had a negative impact on him. However, I could tell her in all honesty that Cowboy had found his long-time home. He was adopted by people where there were lots of people around all of the time. They didn't need to take him to public exercising. They had plenty of room, access to forest and open areas. to exercise him. And as they said, there's always people around here, and as long as his people are around, he's good. And they manage his separation anxiety quite capably. They've learnt that if they put him in the home, if they all go away, put him in a safe place, he's quite content until they return. This, of course, took time. So these extracts are only one small insight to the stories that people tell us about understanding what it means for them in their journey. And we learn that maybe we could circumvent some of these. Maybe there's more information we could give people about the care of these types of dogs when they take them into their environment. Where to next? To complete this study, and then study 3 will emerge out of study 2. However, I'm starting to think that the missing piece in my journey is actually the adoption staff, their experiences, and what it means for them to interact with potential adopters. What I'm going to consider is a focus group with adoption staff and adopters, and using a risk reduction approach with the intention that the outcome we want is a safe and friendly animal home environment. And this work is picking up on a great body of work that Dr. Janet Young and her colleagues did during COVID, looking at developing a framework that was aimed at supporting aged care facilities to take residents and their companion animals. And so they spent a great deal of time and invested a great deal of energy in working out how they could make it a safe and friendly animal environment. So I think it offers some opportunity for us to recalibrate and look at the way we do that interface and matching and conversation with potential adopters, being aware of the dog's needs. So thank you for your time, and are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Eileen. And there you are. Lots of questions coming in. Behavioural problems are often highlighted as one of the issues for return, but to what extent is behavioural assessments of the dogs in the shelter used to sort of profile ideal homes to encourage the retention and providing ongoing behavioural support for the owner and the dog once in the house?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. All of the, I was lucky enough to be able to read all the behavioural and health notes behind all of the dogs that have been the subject for the interview. And quite an amount of work is invested in behavioural assessment and work done with them in the shelter. And there are certainly follow-up conversations available to people once they take them home. And in that sample, some people did avail themselves of that. Other people sought advice external to RSPCA. And a lot of the research that I've read in doing this work, it's very hard to get people to take on and do training because they are so much influenced, as has been mentioned in some of the other workshops today, about their own culture and their experiences, and you know, you stick to what you know and who are your go-to people for advice. Interestingly, we found that if you could encourage people to come in contact with their vet fairly soon after adoption, that seemed to be one of the things about a public statement and a commitment to keep the dog. And really, this, you know, so the risk discussion is about how do I manage this dog and its needs, given my lifestyle, my capacity, capability in my home environment. And I think that that's a really interesting question, because what it does is reveal, is there a mismatch between the profile of the dog and the person who has the conversation with me, who's come in, I want a, you know, 40-kilo dog, but I'm 5'2" and 30-kilo ringing wet. So, you know, that's a space that I think we could focus on and learn a lot more.
Yeah, the two-way street that was mentioned.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's about the capacity of the person to risk manage and to show initiative, but to have the capacity, like the two people who's, the guy whose parents gave him the dog had a lot of experience with dogs. You know, the guy who was 60 knew how to chase up information, for example.
Yeah, yeah. A quick question and a short answer, but the coat collar seemed to be an influence of the attractiveness of the dog. Is that a reflection of some behavioral traits of the breed, or is it aesthetics? Why is it?
Well, it's interesting because black has often been talked about in literature as being the less attractive. However, it's the breeds that are in our population, there is a particular component called the bull Arab in Australia, which is an interesting mix. And a number of them throw to a white coat or a brindle coat. So I don't necessarily think it's inherent behaviour, but there'd be people more expert on that than I am. However, I think it's about the context and environments from which they possibly come. So, you know,
well, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much, Eileen. There might be more questions coming up in the Slack channel. If you can log on to that and please answer them. Thank you very much for your talk.
Fine, thank you.
And we finish off this first session of the day with the short talks. Just like yesterday, there are 4 short talks. They're each 3 minutes long. They're pre-recorded, and we will show you them one after the other. And once they're all finished, the 4 speakers will come on camera and we can ask them the questions each. So please, here are 4 short talks.
Social media is a popular tool for showcasing animals, but the use of animals as photo props is a concern, as they often involve getting close to wild animals or anthropomorphizing companion animals just to make them cute. While research has highlighted some concerning trends regarding exotic animal portrayal on social media, we actually know little about the prevalence of anthropomorphism of companion animals. So with this in mind, our study investigated the portrayal of companion animal content on public Instagram accounts. 7 common domestic and exotic companion animals were selected for this study. 10 accounts for each species were pseudo-randomly selected, with a random selection of 10 still image posts from each account then assessed for their content, popularity, and comments. We found that anthropomorphism was prevalent across all species, accounting for about 30% of posts. Anthropomorphic content included the wearing of clothes and animals staged like they were doing human activities. These types of posts received more likes and comments than natural content. Product promotion was more commonly linked to anthropomorphic posts, usually because they were for human rather than animal products. Product promotion was particularly popular with dogs and cats, but concerningly we saw a high number involving reptiles as well. And in regards to comments on the posts, we found that comments were almost always positive, no matter the content. Our study found that anthropomorphic content was popular with consumers, and that there seems to be a growing trend for the anthropomorphism of exotic companion animals. This is a concern, as anthropomorphism can contribute to stress and negative welfare through a misunderstanding of an animal's behavior and needs, leading to inappropriate care. We also found highly encouraging comments on all posts, which is similar to previous studies on exotic animal YouTube videos, reflecting the cute factor. This can increase the desirability of exotic pet ownership and contributes to unrealistic expectations towards these animals. This indicates a limited public understanding of the negative welfare impacts associated with anthropomorphism. Our study demonstrates a need for concern regarding companion animal content on social media. This content does need further study for their animal welfare concerns, and understanding how this content influences public understanding of companion animals, pet keeping in general, and normal behavior is important to determining the widespread implications of social media. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Solama Akter Shanta from Bangladesh. First of all, I would like to give thanks for giving me a platform to share my study about dairy cow lameness. Lameness, do you know it causes loss of income to the dairy industry next to mastitis and infertility? It hampers milk production, whereas high milk yield is our first priority. Moreover, lameness induces pain, which violates animal welfare. But unfortunately, in our country, dairy producers don't consider lameness as a problem until it undergoes severe form. Spite of serious impact of lameness on welfare and milk production, there is very limited data on lameness in Bangladesh, though dairy industry is an emerging trend in here. That's why we took an attempt to know the prevalence of lameness and contributing factors causing this. We conducted a cross-sectional study on randomly selected 643 cows from 30 herds through pre-tested questionnaire and direct observation. We observed animals in motion for detection of any kind of abnormalities in locomotion. Out of 643 dairy cattle, we found 107 cows showed lameness in different grades. Many factors are involved in causing lameness. In our study, we found lameness was significantly associated with flow type, concentrate feed, parity, pregnancy, and milking status. Our study revealed that lameness mainly occurred due to hoof disorder like overgrowth, lesions or cracks, and carpal or tarsal joint lesion. Lameness was significantly higher in the hind limbs than in forelimbs. In milking dairy cows, the mean daily milk yield was about 11 liters per day per cow. Then it was significantly reduced to about 9 liters per day per cow after the onset of lameness. It means lameness is associated with milk yield and directly it has an economic importance. So in this situation, what should we do? At first, farmers should be aware about lameness. How does awareness develop? It's through training on welfare and early detection of lameness. Farmers should give attention to lactating cows for prevention of lameness through avoiding risk factors or early diagnosis and treatment of lameness to minimize the economic loss. Finally, farmers will be benefited, which is our ultimate goal. Thanks to all.
My name is Asfa Sakhawat and I'm doing PhD from Meat Science and Technology Department, University of Veterinary and Animal Sciences, Lahore. And thank you, UFAW, for providing me a chance to speak on the topic assessment of free slaughter practices, the CAP survey of goat welfare and abattoir of Punjab and Sindh. Let's talk about the background and methodology. You know that with the around 82 million goat herds, Pakistan stands fourth largest country globally and producing 0.8 million tons mutton. And from farm to abattoir, many pre-slaughter practices are adopted by the stock person, which causes stress and during the slaughter goats and compromises their goat welfare and quality. For that purpose, a study was conducted to evaluate the knowledge, attitude, and practices of animal welfare amongst different stock persons in the mutton value chain and to assess the goats' welfare slaughtered there. So for that purpose, I just do the survey and around 120 number at 3 abattoirs of each province, and then started the live animal characteristics at a loading, observed legs, injury of 500 goats, and then observed the sex, age, body condition scoring, ticks, injury, and live weights. And after that, slaughtering, I observed the carcass weight and poses of 500 goats. So if we talk about the key results, a total of 54% out of 118 males, they have 18 to 30 years of age. 79% males were informally educated, and 64% have less than 5-year experience. So the bar graph shows that the knowledge score was 2.94, for attitude 3.43, and for practice the score was 3.13. The probability of knowledge score and practice score was found in order that vets and handler staff have higher knowledge, and loaders and drivers have the least one. So if we talk about the goats, of the 500 healthy goats, 83% were juvenile and 61% were male, and overall the breasting percentage was found 47. The graph shows that around 10% goats have 10% goats have bruises on the carcass, and poor condition score was found in 12% goats. 15% goats were mud soiled, and 7% have shivering legs, and 2% were emergency goats found at abattoirs. So if we conclude the session, in Pakistan, overall the GAP scores were around the median, but attitude scores were higher. We can conclude poor knowledge and practices for animal welfare were strongly associated with the stock person's type, education, and legal awareness and understandings. And poor handling practices, mismanagement, and during transit, inadequate awareness causes welfare abnormalities on livestock characteristics and carcasses. And thank you for the research funded by the Human Slaughter Association.
Hi everyone, my name is Syed Bukhari. I am a PhD student at Jogi Club College of Veterinary Medicine and Life Sciences, City University of Hong Kong. I will be presenting our findings saying that owner belief in sentience leads to better donkey welfare in a very challenging working environment. Working donkeys are important for supporting human living standards, especially in low and middle income countries. However, there is little information on the effect of human perception of sentience in working donkeys. Interviews with donkey owners were conducted in Pakistan, and multiple corresponding analyses were used to understand the relationship between owners' recognition of emotion and pain in donkeys and their working practices. Two clusters were identified using multiple corresponding analyses. Cluster 1, which is the positive cluster, represented practices that benefits donkey welfare, such as recognizing donkey pain and emotions along with willingness to follow guidelines. Availability of feed and water, absence of donkey injuries, and use of saddle padding were also clustered in the same group. In the second cluster, which is the negative cluster, represented practices that do not benefit donkey welfare, such as the use of saddle without padding and lack of feed and water during work. Presence of injuries, owners not recognizing donkey feel pain and emotion along with unwillingness to follow loading guidelines were also found in the same cluster. Owners who recognize sentience in their donkeys are more likely to use practices that are good for donkey welfare. The ability of owners to identify sentience in donkeys along with willingness to follow guidelines are important factors in improving donkey welfare and may influence how working donkeys are treated. Explaining to owners the benefits of improving the health and welfare of their working donkeys through proper working practices without affecting their livelihood may help motivate a positive change. We thank equine vets and donkey owners in Pakistan for their support for our ongoing projects. And we also thank Dr. Saad for her help and advice in our studies. We thank Donkey Sanctuary and the Book UK also for their advice and support. If you have any questions, please write in the chat box or discuss with me after the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, all of you. Can I ask the 4 speakers to put on their cameras, please? We may have some connection issues because we are going all around the world here, but we will try our best. We have Caroline, we have Solama, Syed, and Asfa. Asfa might have problems. There you are, Asfa, welcome. There are questions coming in. The first question is for Carolyn. How did you measure anthropomorphism? We can't hear you. You are muted. Try again. No, we still can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, sorry. That is a good question. So mostly we defined anthropomorphism first as anything that implied a humanistic lifestyle. So we were really looking at the promotion of natural behaviors versus the promotion of more human-based styles in terms of wearing clothing or performing certain activities like lounging on sunbeds and pretending to be at a resort. So anything that was really not about a natural behavior was considered anthropomorphism.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for Solama about the lameness assessment. How were they used? How did you carry out these? Was you using a mobility scale or a scoring by the same researcher?
Hello, good day.
Hello.
Thank you for your nice question. Actually, I did this work. Only based on history, taking history from farmers, and also we observed their locomotion during we observed their locomotion when we select as a lame animal. I collected data through questionnaire and I observed animal if it is lame.
Okay. There might be more questions after, depending on the timing here. I have a question for Asfa. Did you, sorry, my question box just flipped. Did you have any thoughts, sorry, this is for you, Asfa. Did you have any thoughts on how the stock person's knowledge and attitudes can be improved at the abattoir, particularly if they don't have the education, or if they have some inherited particular beliefs about animals? How can we improve the treatment?
Thank you so much, Nelson, for asking a nice question. That there is a lack of knowledge and practices are going on, but you know that there are some organizations like they can provide, and usually once a year, but they provide a training like on halal, especially on halal point of view, but not but they usually don't put they don't highlight those practices that they are going to be done in usual practice. So for that purpose, there is a dire need of training here. Training on each means on we can deliver training on each slaughterhouses, like those who are stock persons who are dealing with that. And my next phase, I'm gonna doing that. So then after that, there are some organizations, but like there is a need here over there to give them training, like
no specific body here that who usually deliver training, but we are linking up with the stakeholders, like they can arrange some kind of training for lower staff as well, those who are dealing in the transportation and all that.
Yeah.
To improve the animal welfare and meat quality.
Yes, thank you, Asfa. The last question we have time for is for Syed. What are the reasons, or what are the causes of these differences in belief in sentience? Are they driven by, is it to education, or differences in interest, or something else? We can't hear you, I'm afraid, Syed.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, actually in our study, we didn't study that what could be the reason behind that, but yes, what we actually think based on this is the thing that we are actually suggesting based on this work, that this could be due to the owner understanding of donkey emotion and pain. So when they know that yes, their donkey do feel pain, like if they are educated about sentience by different organizations such as like Donkey Sanctuary is working in Pakistan, SPCA and is working in Pakistan. So if they know that their donkey do feel pain and emotion, like they have sentience, so they treat their animal in a much better way. So much better way means that they do provide feed and water to their donkeys, and if they have injury, they do take them to the veterinary hospital and things like this. So yes, we believe that there could be the reasons behind this, but we have not studied this yet, that whether this is motivated because of education, but we think that this is because of education, because there are some other study that has been done in Chile and some other part of the world in Africa. So yes, they are similar answers. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Syed. We have run out of time, but if you have questions, many of the short talks have also posted posters on, and you can ask questions both through the talks and the posters in the Slack channel. So if your questions were not answered now, please post them there. Thank you very much, all four of you. We now have a short break. Well, it's half an hour's break. It's 9:32 here in Great Britain, and we will come back again at 10 o'clock. The session will be closed down, and you will then have to click again on the link. It's exactly the same link, and we'll come back again at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.